So the second workshop we will be focusing on, or the second tool we will be using and explaining, is the stakeholder mapping one. So what is it? Stakeholder mapping is another visual analysis tool helping you identify key stakeholders in your challenge, and more importantly, understand the relationship between them, also the nature of their relationship to the challenge. And just like in movies, to identify who your key and who your supporting actors are, so you can accurately design actions for each of them. Also, understanding relationships and mapping out stakeholders helps us further determine which stakeholders are most useful to engage with and which we should therefore prioritize. Listing them on a piece of paper, like we will be doing now, will let you notice their clusters, if there are any particular groups of stakeholders sharing a similar agenda, which of them are likely to be working with you on a challenge and which might hold an opposite side. And crucial to this exercise is categorizing stakeholders according to certain traits, certain attributes, certain criteria. And the most used ones that we will be focusing on today are influence, necessity or urgency, relevance, interest, attitude, adaptation or resistance to change, and expertise. So these are different attributes we will be mapping stakeholders against. Now, due to the number of criteria and their combinations, you can end up with a lot of different mapping systems, where each map can consist of different combinations of these variables. And as in any other dynamic system, stakeholders networks, they change. So it is recommended that this step gets done early on in the process and then gets revisited throughout the work in progress. This step, importantly, doesn't include the stakeholder engagement, as this is a separate step. We're just mapping stakeholders. We're not to engage with them yet. When should we use this exercise, this tool? So it is useful to identify, to characterize and prioritize actors you will be engaging with. You will be able to decide the best level of engagement for each of them. And you might want to only keep them informed about the project you're working on, the challenge you are trying to solve, or invite them to take part actively in the project decision making. Using a simple graph or a map will let you see where stakeholders stand when evaluated against the same key criteria and compared to each other, as well as examine a broader interplay between all the relationships in this kind of zoomed out, more broader perspective. And why is it useful? Because with a simple graph or with a simple map that we will be building, you can see where stakeholders stand when evaluated against the same key criteria and compared to each other. And at the same time, this tool will help you visualize the complex interplay of relationships, which can potentially even derail you or ruin your project, or kind of pause it. By doing that, you can make consequently better decisions about the correct strategies to engage each participant. So now, after we have conducted the previous exercise, which was a very basic pentagonal tool problem, quite easy to follow, we now move on to a more complex one. So this one will take more of your time and it will require more focus, more dedication, asking you to dive deeper into the nuances of characterizing your stakeholders. So as you can see, it is a rather long exercise. It will take you approximately 40 to 180 minutes depending on the number of maps you will be building. We will not be building that many today. We will be walking you through only 2. Difficulty is medium to high, so it is definitely something that is achievable. What will you get out of this exercise? So, as I said previously, this is a visual map with the differences, showing you differences between actors in behavior, role, and attitude to the challenge, their position to the challenge, where they stand in regards to it, as well as the power relationships amongst them. And as a result, you can come up with different engagement strategies to apply depending on the specific stakeholder. So before we start with the step-by-step explanation of how to do stakeholder mapping, we will first introduce some key criteria which we'll use to build maps with, and according to which all stakeholders will be mapped and evaluated. There are quite a few of those criteria. We have listed the most important ones, which are 7 of those, which we will go through now and build our maps with. So the first one, starting with the influence. So influence is the ability of your stakeholder to influence, modify, or drive your initiative or other stakeholders. How much can they influence other stakeholders? How much can they influence your process? What is the source of their influence? Is it their authority? Is it their hierarchy? Resources that they have, relationships that they have? So start thinking about the type of influence that any particular stakeholder might have on your project, on your challenge. Necessity or urgency. So this particular actor that you are thinking of working with, is this stakeholder somebody who could sabotage, risk, or even ruin the process if they were not included in the engagement, if you are to leave them out? So regardless of their stance, regardless of their interest in the project, how likely is it that unless you include them, they will negatively influence or negatively impact the project? Should you therefore be including them? Relevance. This is a combination of influence and necessity, and it results in the relevance of this particular stakeholder. And it can give you a first approximation of which stakeholders to engage with. Interest. How willing is the stakeholder to engage? Is she really interested in being part of the project, in helping you out? Is their position one of indifference to your project? Attitude. Regardless of their willingness to be engaged, their stance towards the transition process may be in favor, against, or indifferent. So will they support the project or your program? Will they be neutral? Do you expect them to fight against it? So what is their attitude towards this project? Adaptation or resistance to change. How adaptable or resistant is the stakeholder to the changes? What is the likelihood for them to change their position throughout the process once you start working with them, once you start including them? Or do you think that their position is likely to remain the same? Expertise. Does the stakeholder have information, counsel, or expertise on the issue that could be helpful to you and to the process? What resources are they providing to the current system? Is it money, some other resources, personnel, their staff, knowledge, materials, products, services? So now, once you have finished mapping a particular individual or an organization or a stakeholder according to those criteria, now we can start building maps, which will help us see where stakeholders stand when evaluated against the same key criteria and then compared to each other. Okay, so now equipped with the understanding of the objective of the exercise and the criteria that we will use to map and prioritize stakeholders, let's dive into the methodology of developing maps. Maps are about having some kind of a visual in front of you, which is helping you rank stakeholders, prioritize stakeholders according to different criteria. And we have just gone through 7 criteria. With a simple graph we are about to design now, you will be able to see where stakeholders stand when, first of all, evaluated against the same key criteria and then compared to each other. And as mentioned above, we will be focusing on 2 maps in total, starting with the first one that you can see on the screen, which is the relevance map. So this is one of the simplest map and can be used as a starting point for a wider map analysis. As previously explained, the relevance as a criterion is made up of 2 other criterion or 2 other criteria, influence and necessity combination. So you will start by drawing a quadrant using 2 axes labeled low to high, and then you will add on the x axis, you will add influence on the horizontal one, as you can see, and then necessity or urgency on the vertical, on the y-axis. And now start discussing where each stakeholder you're analyzing falls in by comparing both of those attributes, both of those criteria, and then plot them out on the quadrant. The second step is, so the most relevant actors will be those closest to the upper right-hand side of the map. So in this case, the red or the orange part of the map, because they are the ones that have both a high influence and high necessity. And conversely, the lower left-hand side shows the least relevant actors. Therefore, as you can see in the picture, 3 main areas can be identified, showing different degrees of relevance. Actors falling into the red or orange area can be considered as key in terms of their relevance and should definitely be included in any further analysis or engagement process. Stakeholders in the middle, in the yellow area, should be taken into consideration and enrich the list of stakeholders to be included in more in-depth analysis. But those stakeholders which are now plotted on the green area, it doesn't mean you should automatically not include them in further analysis or in your process, but rather you can put them lower down on your priority list. And in any event, remember that throughout the project's lifetime, as it evolves, stakeholders' relevance may change. So people that are currently in the red part can definitely go to the green part and become less relevant to your case, and vice versa. So always keep them in mind, those people which are currently, or organizations which are currently plotted on the more green part of the map. Now, moving on to another slightly more elaborate map, and this is the last map that we have decided to focus on. It is called Relevance, Interest, Expertise map. So here we are using 3 types of criteria. So this map is a bit more complicated than the previous, the relevance one. What you will need is first to complete the relevance map so that you can classify actors according to it. And only once you finish with the previous map, with the relevance map, you can start drawing the relevance, expertise, interest map or a matrix in which the vertical axis accounts for the interest and the horizontal for the relevance. Now, again, from the relevance map, pick out those actors with medium to high relevance, which is, as we mentioned, red and yellow areas, and use those actors to map the expertise relevance matrix. Actors falling into the green part shouldn't be ruled out of the process, as we said, but included in further analysis to decide about their engagement in time and the way they engage. Now, place actors according to the combination of their attributes, as in the first picture. The expertise is included in the matrix in differing plot size. So the more expertise an actor has, the bigger the size of its plot, as you can see on the picture. Thereby, you get to compare stakeholders one to another using those very simple 3 criteria. Now, different areas we now have here can give you some insights in the strategy that you can adopt when dealing with those actors who are part of each area, depending where you have positioned them. And you can see this in the second image. So with actors showing little or no interest for the project, but that are highly relevant for it, you should meet their needs, but no further engagement is necessary since they're not interested. Conversely, if an actor shows a high interest for the project, despite their low relevance, you should think about engaging them. And this engagement becomes mandatory in the case when they are also relevant, which is only normal. So this combination of high interest and high relevance will show you the key actors you have to engage with for the project, that you would like to engage with. The fourth area is in the lower left-hand side of the map, where actors are located with little relevance or interest. You don't have to forget them again, but they're not as important as the others. And what we also must do is assess the influence of the expertise in it. Generally speaking, actors with high expertise should be engaged in the process as long as their relevance is medium to high or their interest is high, despite the relevance. In other cases, simply informing them about the project you're working on or communicating with them the project should be enough. And finally, regardless of the different areas of influence, clusters of interest and conflicts can be depicted on the matrix. Gathering information from the stakeholders on the map, you can identify those relations that are more evident or relevant and draw them on the map as well. By doing that, you can see if it is worth engaging an actor with no relevance, with no interest, but with expertise and a conflict with some key actor. At the same time, we could identify a stakeholder acting as a link between two clusters, two groups of actors, which would turn him into a key stakeholder for the process, regardless of his relevance, interest, or even expertise. Another approach is to differentiate actors considering their attitude to the project. This new layer of information can help to understand some of the conflicts or the creation of clusters of interest. In any event, it will enrich the map with valuable information for the phase of strategy design. Now, this is the so-called after mapping step, when we start to lay out our strategies. The natural step after we do the whole mapping, so it can be either one map, it can be two maps, or it can be many more maps, which we obviously did not do, but in theory you could be doing them. Natural step after doing the mapping phase is to come up with an engagement strategy for each of them, because the whole idea of mapping is not to stop there, just to have them mapped. The idea is to decide on the next steps according to the visual that you have in front of you. So to design some kind of an engagement strategy. And of course, this is the most difficult step, but also the most valuable, the most useful one, and the main reason for mapping them out altogether. Therefore, try to do it even if you don't have the perfect strategy right now. It does not need to be a final strategy. Just some very basic blocks and kind of dots of where do you see each of them sitting as part of your project or potentially part of the solution to the challenge you are dealing with. So first of all, summarize the outcomes of your maps by including them in a table with the attribute assessment for each stakeholder. Low, medium, high level of any criteria, as you can see on the screen. Then write down the strategy you drew from each map according to the stakeholder's position on the map. So key actor, does it meet their needs, keep them informed, etc. And now it is time for filling in information about the stakeholders that you consider important but is not reflected on the maps. Think about any circumstance that might make their future involvement difficult. For instance, you might have found out that you do not know enough yet about specific actors that you have identified. This could, for example, result in efforts to learn more about these actors or use a cautious strategy with them. So write down this new data in the so-called observation cells, as you can see in the slide. And once the main features have been discovered, summarized, and discuss the best strategy or a set of strategies that should be applied to each stakeholder. And this is how we end our stakeholder mapping.